Captured by aliens. Aboard the derelict ship, Zorax's exoskeleton clicked in anticipation as he examined their captive through the one-way plast steel window of the holding cell. Lieutenant Commander Marcus Reynolds, the remnant of a doomed Earth expedition, was humanity's last hope and Zorax's key to crushing his rivals in the Zork's military hierarchy. If only he could break the human's will and extract the secrets of Earth's defenses and technology. Ignoring warnings. Ignoring the dire warnings of Dr. Zor about the dangers of reviving an unknown species, Zorax ordered his top interrogator to begin the mind probe, eager to rip the information from Reynolds' brain by any means necessary. The battle of wills would begin soon, with the fate of humanity and Zorax's tenuous grip on power hanging in the balance. Reynolds would fight to his last breath to protect his homeworld and ensure the aliens regretted their decision to awaken him from his icy slumber. First encounter. Reynolds blinked hard, his vision slowly coming into focus as he took in his surroundings. He was in a small, dimly lit room with smooth metallic walls that seemed to pulse with an eerie green light. As his eyes adjusted, he found himself face to face with the imposing figure of Captain Zorax, flanked by two armed guards. Defiance. Human, Zorax hissed. You will tell us what we want to know. Reveal the secrets of your planet's defenses and the location of your advanced technology, and we may spare your life. Reynolds set his jaw, his icy blue eyes locking with Zorax's compound ones. Go to hell, he spat, his voice hoarse from disuse. I'll never betray my people, no matter what you do to me. The battle begins. Zorax's guards stepped forward, their weapons trained on Reynolds, but the captain held up a clawed hand to stop them. We have ways of making you talk, human, he said, his voice dripping with menace. You will give us what we want, one way or another. But Reynolds was already in motion, his muscles coiled and ready for action. He lunged forward in a blur of movement, catching the guards off balance. His fist connected with the first guard's jaw, sending him sprawling to the ground. The second guard raised his weapon, but Reynolds was faster, grabbing the guard's arm and twisting it behind his back until he heard the sickening crack of bone. Escaping the cell, Zorax let out a roar of rage, but Reynolds was already moving, his body a whirlwind of precise strikes and fluid movements. He snatched a weapon from one of the fallen guards and fired, the energy beam searing through Zorax's exoskeleton and sending him stumbling back. Reynolds didn't waste any time. He burst out of the holding cell, his heart pounding in his chest as he raced down the unfamiliar corridors of the alien ship. Alarms blared and lights flashed, but Reynolds kept moving, his mind racing as he tried to make sense of his surroundings. Finding an alley. As he rounded a corner, he nearly collided with a tall, spindly figure in a white lab coat. The alien let out a startled yelp, but Reynolds grabbed him by the collar and shoved him against the wall. Where am I? He demanded, his voice low and dangerous. What do you want with me? The alien held up his hands in surrender, his large, bulbous eyes wide with fear. Please, don't hurt me, he stammered. I am Dr. Zor, a scientist. I mean you no harm. Learning the situation, Reynolds loosened his grip slightly but kept his weapon trained on the doctor. Start talking, he growled. Dr. Zor took a deep breath, his thin voice trembling slightly as he spoke. You are aboard a Zork's military vessel. We discovered your ship drifting in space and brought you aboard. Captain Zorax believes that you may hold the key to our survival. Understanding the stakes, Reynolds narrowed his eyes. What do you mean? The Zork's empire is on the brink of war with a powerful enemy, Dr. Zor explained. We are desperate for any advantage we can find. Your technology, your knowledge of warfare, it could be the difference between victory and annihilation. Determination. Reynolds shook his head. I don't care about your war, he said. I just want to get back to Earth to warn my people about the threat you pose. Dr. Zor's expression turned grave. I'm afraid that may not be possible, he said, Your ship was badly damaged, and we are light years from your home planet. Even if you could find a way off this ship, you would be stranded in space with no way to return to Earth. Finding a way. Reynolds felt a sinking feeling in the pit of his stomach, but he pushed it aside. He had to focus on the task at hand, finding a way to survive and gather information on his captors. He couldn't trust the Zorks, no matter what Dr. Zor said. "I'll take my chances," he said, pushing past the doctor and continuing down the corridor, his weapon at the ready. He had to find a way off this ship, had to find a way back to Earth. The fate of humanity depended on it. The Great Escape. Aboard the fighter, Reynolds sprinted through the winding corridors of the alien ship, his heart pounding in his chest as he searched for a way off the vessel. His mind raced with possibilities, trying to recall everything he knew about spacecraft systems and engineering. As he rounded a corner, he skidded to a halt, his eyes widening at the sight before him. The hangar bay. A massive hangar bay stretched out in front of him, filled with rows of sleek, menacing fighter craft. Reynolds moved closer, his gaze sweeping over the unfamiliar technology. He ran his fingers along the smooth metallic surface of one of the fighters, marveling at the advanced design. Unexpected help. "Impressive, isn't it?" a voice said from behind him. Reynolds spun around, his weapon raised, but he lowered it slightly when he saw Dr. Zor standing there, his hands raised in a gesture of peace, offering assistance. "What do you want?" Reynolds asked, his voice tense. "To help you," Dr. Zor replied. "I know you don't trust me, but I can show you how to pilot one of these fighters. It may be your only chance to escape." Accepting the offer, Reynolds hesitated for a moment, weighing his options. He knew he couldn't trust the Zorks, but he also knew that he was running out of time. With a curt nod, he lowered his weapon and followed Dr. Zor to one of the fighters. Learning to fly. The cockpit was cramped and unfamiliar, but Reynolds quickly familiarized himself with the controls. Dr. Zor pointed out the key systems and gave him a crash course in the fighter's capabilities. Preparing for launch. "You'll need to move fast," Dr. Zor warned. "As soon as you launch, they'll be on your tail." Reynolds nodded, his jaw set with determination. "I'll make it," he said. "I have to." Launching. With a final nod of thanks to Dr. Zor, Reynolds sealed the cockpit and powered up the fighter's engines. The hangar bay doors slid open, revealing the vast expanse of space beyond. Reynolds took a deep breath and pushed the throttle forward, the fighter leaping out of the hangar and into the void. Pursued by enemies. Almost immediately, alarms began to blare throughout the Zork ship. Captain Zorax, still reeling from his encounter with the human, let out a roar of rage as he watched the stolen fighter disappear into the distance. "The chase begins." "After him," he bellowed, his voice echoing through the ship's corridors. "Bring that human back, dead or alive." The Zork's fighters swarmed out of the hangar, their engines screaming as they chased after Reynolds. The human gritted his teeth and pushed his fighter to its limits, weaving and dodging through the barrage of energy beams that erupted around him. Gathering intel. As he flew, Reynolds accessed the fighter's computer systems, searching for any information he could find on the Zorks and their plans. What he discovered made his blood run cold. The invasion plan. The Zorks were not only at war with another alien race, but they were also planning to invade Earth and subjugate humanity. They saw humans as a weak and primitive species, ripe for conquest and enslavement. A surge of determination. Reynolds felt a surge of anger and determination flood through him. He had to escape, had to warn Earth of the impending threat. The fate of his entire species depended on it. Outmaneuvering the Zorks. He pushed the fighter even harder, his hands flying over the controls as he outmaneuvered the Zork's pursuers. The chase took them through asteroid fields and past the burning remains of long-dead stars, the fighters dancing a deadly ballet through the void. Victory and escape. In the end, it was Reynolds' skill and determination that won out. With a final burst of speed, he left the Zork's fighters behind, disappearing into the vast expanse of space. But he knew that his journey was far from over. He had to find a way back to Earth, had to warn his people of the danger that lurked among the stars. And he would stop at nothing to ensure that humanity survived, no matter the cost. Allies and enemies. The pursuit continues. Reynolds gripped the controls of the stolen Zorks fighter, his knuckles white as he pushed the craft to its limits. The pursuing Zork ships were relentless, their energy beams slicing through the void around him. He knew he couldn't outrun them forever. He needed a plan. Entering the asteroid field, his eyes scanned the star charts on the fighter's display, searching for anything that could give him an advantage. Then he saw it, a dense asteroid field not far from his current position. A grim smile tugged at his lips. It was a risky move, but it might just be his only chance. The desperate maneuver. Reynolds banked hard, sending the fighter hurtling towards the field. The Zork ships followed, their pilots eager to prove themselves to their captain. As he neared the asteroids, Reynolds took a deep breath, his focus narrowing to the task at hand. Navigating the field. He plunged into the field, weaving and dodging through the tumbling rocks with a skill born of desperation. The Zorks fighters struggled to keep up, their bulky frames ill-suited for such delicate maneuvering. One by one, they fell behind, unable to match the humans' daring piloting. Finding a weapon. But Reynolds wasn't content to simply evade his pursuers. He needed to disable the Zorks mothership to buy himself more time to escape. He scanned the asteroid field, searching for the perfect weapon. A deadly trap there. A massive, jagged rock, easily twice the size of his fighter. Reynolds gunned the engines, aiming straight for the asteroid. At the last second, he pulled up, skimming along its surface with barely a meter to spare. The Zorks' downfall. The Zork ships weren't so lucky. Two of them slammed into the asteroid, their hulls crumpling like tin cans. The third managed to veer away at the last second, but not before its wing clipped the rock, sending it spinning out of control. A temporary victory. Reynolds allowed himself a moment of satisfaction, but it was short-lived. The Zork's mothership loomed ahead, its weapons already swiveling to target his fighter. He jinked and weaved, trying to evade the incoming fire, but it was a losing battle. The boarding party. Suddenly, the ship shuddered as something slammed into its hull. Reynolds checked his sensors and cursed. A boarding party, led by none other than Captain Zoraks himself. The Zork's commander was determined to capture the human, even if it meant risking his own life. Bracing for combat. Reynolds knew he had only moments before the Zorks breached his cockpit. He reached for his sidearm, checking the charge on the energy pistol. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. Confronting Zoraks. The cockpit door hissed open, revealing the looming figure of Zoraks, flanked by two of his soldiers. The Zork's captain's eyes glinted with a mix of anger and grudging respect as he beheld the human pilot. The final stand. Surrender, human, Zoraks growled, his voice like gravel. You have nowhere to run. Reynolds didn't bother to respond. He lunged forward, his pistol spitting bolts of energy at the Zorks. Zoraks dodged aside, his movements unnaturally quick for a being of his size. His soldiers weren't so lucky, taking the brunt of Reynolds' fire and crumpling to the deck. A desperate struggle. Reynolds and Zoraks circled each other, their weapons trained on one another. The Zork's captain feinted left, then lunged right, his claws slashing at Reynolds' face. The human ducked and rolled, coming up behind Zoraks and aiming a kick at the back of his knee. A grim decision. The blow connected, staggering the Zorks, but Zoraks was far from finished. He spun around, his fists slamming into Reynolds' chest and sending him flying across the cockpit. Reynolds hit the wall hard, the breath driven from his lungs. Zoraks' triumph. Zoraks closed in, his eyes glinting with triumph. You fought well, human, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. But in the end, you are no match for the might of the Zork's empire. The final gamble. Reynolds coughed, tasting blood in his mouth. He knew Zorax was right. He couldn't beat the Zork's captain in hand-to-hand combat. But maybe he didn't have to. Self-destruct. His eyes flicked to the fighter's control panel, just a few meters away. If he could just reach it. With a burst of desperate strength, Reynolds lunged forward, his fingers closing around the edge of the panel. The escape pod. Zorax roared in anger, his claws slashing at Reynolds' back. But it was too late. Reynolds slammed his hand down on the self-destruct button, a grim smile on his face. The fighter's computer began to count down, its voice eerily calm as it announced the impending destruction of the craft. A narrow escape. Zorax's eyes widened in shock and fear. He turned to run, his soldiers close behind him, but Reynolds knew they would never make it in time. He closed his eyes, bracing himself for the end, but at the last second, he remembered the fighter's escape pod. Blasting free. With a final burst of strength, Reynolds hauled himself towards it, his fingers scrabbling at the release mechanism. The pod blasted free just as the fighter exploded, the shockwave sending it tumbling end over end through space. Temporary safety. Reynolds clung to the restraints, his heart pounding in his chest as he watched the Zork ship recede into the distance, heavily damaged and listing to one side. He had done it. He had bought himself some time. But he knew the Zorks would not give up so easily. They would come for him again, and next time, he might not be so lucky. A moment of rest. Reynolds leaned back in his seat, his eyes drifting closed as the adrenaline began to fade. He had a long journey ahead of him and many more battles to fight. But for now, he allowed himself a moment of rest, secure in the knowledge that he had struck a blow against the Zork's empire and that Earth still had a chance. Return to Earth. Floating in space, Reynolds floated in the cramped escape pod, his mind racing as he tried to process everything that had happened. The adrenaline from his narrow escape was starting to wear off, replaced by a dull ache in his muscles and a throbbing in his head where Zorax had struck him. He took a deep breath, wincing at the sharp pain in his ribs, and tried to focus on his next move. Limited options. He knew he had to find a way to warn Earth about the Zork's threat, but he was stranded in the middle of uncharted space, with no idea where he was or how to get back home. The escape pod had limited supplies and no faster-than-light capabilities, which meant he was effectively stuck unless he could find a way to signal for help. An unexpected rescue. Reynolds was just starting to consider his options when a sudden jolt rocked the pod, sending him sprawling against the wall. He grabbed for a handhold, his heart pounding as he tried to figure out what was happening. Was it the Zorks coming to finish him off, or had he drifted into the path of an asteroid or some other space debris? A human ship. But as he watched through the pod's small viewport, he realized that neither of those possibilities was correct. Instead, he saw the sleek, angular lines of a human ship, its tractor beam locking onto his pod and reeling him in like a fish on a line. A new hope. Reynolds felt a surge of relief and trepidation as the ship's airlock cycled open and a figure in a crisp uniform stepped through, flanked by a pair of armed security officers. The figure removed their helmet, revealing the face of a woman with short, dark hair and piercing blue eyes. Meeting Commander Novak. Lieutenant Commander Marcus Reynolds. The woman asked, her voice calm and authoritative. I'm Commander Elena Novak, captain of the exploration vessel Prometheus. What the hell are you doing out here? Delivering the warning. Reynolds struggled to his feet, his body protesting every movement. Commander Novak, I apologize for the intrusion, but I have urgent news. The Zork's empire is planning to invade Earth, and we need to warn our people before it's too late. Mobilizing for war. Novak's eyes widened in surprise, but she quickly regained her composure. The Zorks. Are you certain? Reynolds nodded grimly. I was a prisoner on one of their ships. I overheard their plans and managed to escape, but they're not far behind me. We need to get back to Earth and mobilize our defenses before they arrive. Acting quickly. Novak frowned, her expression thoughtful. "This is a grave situation, Commander Reynolds. We'll need to act quickly if we are to have any chance of stopping the Zorks." She turned to one of the security officers. "Ensign, please escort Commander Reynolds to the med bay for a full evaluation. I want a complete report on his condition and any information he can provide about the Zorks' threat." Planning the defense. The ensign nodded and helped Reynolds to his feet, supporting him as they made their way out of the airlock and into the ship's gleaming corridors. Reynolds felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him as the adrenaline finally drained away, but he forced himself to stay focused. He had a mission, and he would see it through, no matter what. Devise a plan. As they traveled back to Earth, Reynolds and Novak spent long hours in the ship's conference room, poring over star charts and tactical data as they tried to devise a plan to counter the Zorks' invasion. They knew that Earth's defenses were woefully inadequate against such an advanced foe, and that they would need to rally every available resource if they were to have any chance of success. New technologies. "We need to develop new weapons and technologies," Reynolds said, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Something that can match the Zorks' firepower and give us a fighting chance." Rallying allies. Novak nodded in agreement. "I'll put our best scientists and engineers on it, but we'll also need to mobilize our fleets and ground forces and coordinate with our allies to mount a united defense." Determination. Reynolds leaned back in his chair, his mind whirling with possibilities. He knew that the odds were stacked against them, but he refused to give up hope. Earth had faced impossible odds before and emerged victorious, and he was determined to make sure that history repeated itself. The final battle. Zorax's fury. Far behind them, on the crippled Zork ship, Captain Zorax paced the bridge like a caged animal, his eyes blazing with fury and humiliation. He had underestimated the human, and it had cost him dearly. His ship was badly damaged, his crew demoralized, and worst of all, he had lost face in front of his subordinates. A vow of revenge. But he would not let this insult go unanswered. He would hunt down the human who had bested him, no matter how long it took or how far he had to go. And when he found him, he would make him pay for his insolence in blood and pain. Setting a course for Earth. Zorax turned to his second-in-command, his voice a low, menacing growl. "Set a course for Earth. We have a score to settle." Preparing for war. The stage was set for a clash of civilizations, a battle that would determine the fate of not just Earth, but the entire galaxy. And at the center of it all was one man, a lone human who had dared to defy an alien empire and who now held the key to his species' survival in his hands. The return home. As the Prometheus approached Earth, Reynolds felt a mix of relief and trepidation. He had made it back, but now came the hard part. Convincing the leaders of Earth to take the Zorks' threat seriously and mobilize for war. Addressing the Council. Reynolds stood before the United Earth Defense Council, his voice steady and determined as he relayed everything he had learned about the Zorks and their plans. The room was filled with murmurs of disbelief and fear, but as Reynolds continued to speak, a sense of resolve began to take hold. Mobilizing forces. "We cannot afford to ignore this threat," he concluded. "We must act now, before it's too late." The council members exchanged grim looks before the chairman spoke. "Commander Reynolds, your bravery and determination are commendable. We will mobilize our forces and prepare for the Zorks' invasion." A united front. Over the next few weeks, Earth underwent a transformation. Fleets of ships were readied, soldiers were trained, and alliances were forged with other species who shared a common interest in stopping the Zorks. Scientists and engineers worked around the clock to develop new weapons and technologies, guided by the information Reynolds had provided. Preparing for the battle. Reynolds himself was at the forefront of these efforts, lending his expertise and rallying the troops. He knew that the coming battle would be the most difficult they had ever faced, but he also knew that they had a fighting chance, and that was all he needed. The Zorks' invasion. Finally, the day arrived. The Zorks' fleet appeared on the edge of Earth's solar system, a massive armada of sleek, menacing ships. The alarm bells rang, and Earth's forces scrambled to their positions. Leading the charge, Reynolds stood on the bridge of the Prometheus, his eyes fixed on the view screen. As the Zork ships drew closer, "All units, prepare for battle," he ordered, his voice calm and steady. "Remember what we're fighting for. We will not let them take our home." The battle begins. The first shots were fired, and the battle began. Earth ships and Zork's fighters clashed in a deadly dance of fire and metal. The void of space lit up with the flashes of weapons fire and the explosions of destroyed ships. A desperate struggle. Reynolds fought with everything he had, directing the battle and taking down Zork ships with precision and skill. But the Zorks were relentless, their advanced technology giving them a significant advantage. A glimmer of hope. Just when it seemed that all hope was lost, a message came through from the Science Division. "Commander Reynolds, we've completed the prototype of the new weapon. It could turn the tide of the battle." Deploying the weapon, Reynolds didn't hesitate. "Deploy it immediately," he ordered. Turning the tide. The new weapon, a powerful energy cannon, was brought online and fired at the heart of the Zork's fleet. The blast tore through the enemy ships, sending them spinning out of control and giving Earth's forces the opening they needed. Victory. With renewed determination, Earth's ships pressed the attack, taking down the remaining Zork's vessels one by one. Finally, the last of the enemy fleet was destroyed, and the battle was won. Aftermath. As the cheers of victory echoed through the comms, Reynolds allowed himself a moment of relief. They had done it. They had saved Earth. Reflection. But he knew that the fight wasn't over. There were still many challenges ahead, and the Zorks would not give up so easily. But with the unity and determination they had shown today, Reynolds was confident that they could face whatever came next. A new era. The victory over the Zorks marked the beginning of a new era for Earth. They had proven themselves as a force to be reckoned with. And the galaxy took notice. Alliances were strengthened, and new opportunities for exploration and cooperation emerged. A hero's legacy. And at the heart of it all was Marcus Reynolds, a hero who had defied the odds and led his people to victory. His name became synonymous with courage and determination, a symbol of humanity's indomitable spirit, a bright future. As Earth looked to the stars, they did so with hope and confidence, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. And Reynolds knew that no matter what happened, they would always be ready to defend their home and their way of life. The end. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel. And for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.